Well, when I got the news by the president of the alumni executive, I was like, couldn't believe. I said, no, it can't be me. So it was really humbling and real honor. But it really also shows that, you know, my work and our work as faculty at the college goes beyond the classrooms and beyond the even church, right? So that's a real vocational gift, and that those gifts, however modest, could be shared to make a world a better place, and kind of glorify God in that sense is a real honor and privilege. And I'm so proud and excited to be at Emmanuel College, that the school that is really cutting edge and leading theological school in Canada and beyond. One of my kind of areas of teaching and research is on those post-colonial feminists. As a practical theologian, specialized in homiletics and religious education. What that means is that whenever I do teach, write, give lectures, and do the services, I put colonialism and its history and its current impact at the nexus of theological and biblical exploration. And this nexus, you know, some other call intersectional, includes race, ethnicity, gender, class, ability, sexual orientation, and other kind of forms of oppressions. And the reason why we need that nexus, that intersectional work, is because the world, as we know it today, is impacted by modern European colonialism. You know, when you look at the world map, it is difficult to find spots that have not been affected by colonial conquest and domination. And many students at Emmanuel have come from all over the world, right? And where their lives have been directly and indirectly impacted by colonialism. And look at our own as a kind of diverse faculty. You know, many of us also testify that our lives are impacted by it. So, and this colonial kind of agenda was enmeshed with a Christian agenda. So that's why interrogating kind of colonial history and its current kind of impact must inevitably be the task and the responsibility of Christian theology. You know, missionaries went to colonial government officials on merchant ships and under the protection of military force. So what these missionaries way back, a few hundred years ago, preached was not only the gospel, but also notions of Christian supremacy and cultural imperialism, as well as the justification of the white hierarchical, you know, notion. And it's not just the past. That's the challenge of the post-colonial world, because this kind of mission activity is still happening. And I'll tell you why this is so kind of timely, because I just came back from the International Academy of Practical Theology. Of course, it was a Zoom conversation last weekend. And I heard on a session where a scholar in Brazil, were telling us that hundreds of ultra-conservative missionaries from the US are coming to her country to convert indigenous people there into Christianity. But not only just talking about so-called gospel, they are also teaching the supporting the current military kind of fascist regime, you know, the leader who doesn't believe in COVID and so on, and promoting misogyny. So there you see the colonialism, Christianity, the feminism is really are enmeshed, and one without the other, considering is really inadequate to tackle this kind of really complex issues. I try to help students to kind of interrogate our own colonial reality by kind of exposing its hidden past, and that past which continues to live in and haunt the present, right? So the very recent news of the unmarked graves of hundreds of children discovered at a few residential schools recently is a real critical case in point, right? That hidden past haunts the present. And how do we preach about this issue? How can we fully know what went on in these schools? And we must really challenge ourselves to ask these questions and grapple with the answers so as not to repeat the past mistakes, right? And that very reality, though different, is also found in the Bible. So when we read and teach and preach, we need to kind of read that scripture from that angle and always discern, therefore, where and how God is at work and how to serve our people. You know, if we are preachers, preaching as a service, how does that work? So those are really, I think, critical. And I hear the church that I go to, the members are really, really shocked by this unmarked graves. So this really hidden, unknown past are really impacting, I think, our people today and challenge our faith, right? And what do we do about it? Teaching is such a sacred and sacramental, very holy vocation, and partly it is sacred and sacramental is because we deal with dignity of people, and that dignity is something that I think is kind of root of my teaching, my pedagogy, with a deep conviction that each person has a potential really to learn and grow, and that each person also seeks that wholeness through, not alone, through interdependent relationships. So assisting students, and that's the goal of teaching, to live their full dignity, not partial, not distorted, but full dignity, really requires to kind of honor and also sometimes challenge their own experiences and previous also experiences. And they bring so much wisdom and gifts into the classroom. And so part of ensuring the dignity is to, kind of affirm their gifts and their lived experience that are so pivotal to understand the past and present and shaping our future as well. This is, very typical practical theological approach where the kind of we pay attention to the situated realities and kind of embodied experiences from the daily to the historical. And knowing that those lived experiences are so different and heterogeneous, right, from each other, that we, as a teaching, my own teaching, had to do with encouraging students to articulate and locate their own subjective positions and their own identities and experience that are often biased and limited, right? And because of also their own privileges. So try to articulate those and do whatever they do with that shapes how they understand work of theology and their own kind of leadership to serve the world. And so sometimes those the recognition has to be challenged, and this is where I would kind of use the kind of two hermeneutics, and one is the hermeneutics of suspicion. We have to even ask why we don't know that, why we didn't know that unmarked graves. Those are kind of questioning our own or lack thereof. And then the other one, I think, is the hermeneutics of humility. Humility is really important and necessary because what we know is already partial, already and always partial. And recognition of the partiality of the knowledge leads to then the truth is always never a singular or fixed or universal, but fragmented. And so that's humbling, but that's also call for further inquiry because we'll never know full. And until then, and here, I also find my pedagogy is interdisciplinary as well. So I often, inspired by scientists, and they never assume that they know everything, right? And so that's why it's more, more examination, more expectations, and so I think similar way, those of us who are doing the theological inquiry and research also have to learn that way. But ultimately, I think pedagogy had to do with helping people to gain their power to act, power to serve, and power to lead. And for the sake of going back to the first kind of root, dignity. So, for the sake of affirming their own dignity, but also advocating on behalf of others for dignities if they are tainted because of those all kinds of forms of oppression, which we talked about earlier with race and gender and many, many different layers of oppression. The Interdependence, a postcolonial feminist practical theology, and postcolonial preaching, creating a ripple effect, in a way break new ground by examining kind of concentric circles of community within which we all live. So in the Interdependence, 6 chapters, I start with a self, like our own personal self, that is the first circle. But then this circle is supported and completely related with family, church or faith communities, nation, religion overall, and the planet Earth, the biggest circle within which all living things find themselves, that they are all follow from it. And so, in a way, why the way that I organize this book this way is because that our own very lives are dependent upon the environment of the communities. And same thing with the postcolonial preaching, the subtitle, creating a ripple effect. Again, what we do matters, and that impact our next moves, including all entire creation. And so why I'm saying this is because whatever we do as academia, we need to keep in mind that these various circles of relationships and organizations are essential, not extra, parts of what we do in the scholarships and research. Because ultimately our goal is to cultivate wholeness for oneself and the whole world, not hierarchical or oppressive, but interdependent. And as you said, mutually reciprocal ways. And therefore, academia would never be in silo. And certainly must not be viewed as separate or higher than other parts of our work. In fact, paying attention to what is happening in faith communities, local, municipal, national and global communities, and whole globe, knowing that paying really close attention to those are really integral part of academic work of postcolonial, feminist, and anti-racist preaching and religious education. So as a theological educator committed to grappling with those unjust forms of oppression and seeking healing and justice, right relationships. I am called to engage many circles beyond the academia that are intertwined our personal, professional, and religious life. The rethinking preaching, I mean, the kind of key word there is rethinking. So let's talk about there a little bit, because when I thought about this very title, I mean, I assume, and I think people should assume that the preaching needs to be constantly rethought, because there's no universal way to preach a sermon, right? Each sermon is shaped not only by the preachers, but also by the hearers and the context and the very, very particular time and space where the people receive and give the sermon. And also the preaching needs to be always rethought, especially at this moment where there are so many critical topics that are, really haunting us in a very new and urgent ways. And so talk about, I mean, COVID-19 global pandemic. I mean, who would have thought that we are going through this in this manner and this scale? So we will have two renowned scholars of preaching, Dr. Frank Thomas, who will address issues of preaching connected to the pandemic, and Dr. Carolyn Hessel will discuss how to preach anti-racism. And along with these fabulous two keynote speakers, we'll have amazing seasoned preachers and teachers of preaching provide a very helpful and insightful kind of tips how to preach as they kind of explore gender, ecological issues, illness, and online and technology use of worship and preaching, and of course, lectionary. How do you do sermon without notes? How do you deliver the sermon in a more embodied way? What is the role of storytelling in preaching? How do we really make the message stick and dramatizing ways? And so, I mean, those 10 workshops will really are gonna bear a lot of good fruits, and that people who are coming hopefully make some good early harvest, summer harvest through this conference.